Praful Sharma, who I'll now introduce. Dr. Praful Sharma did his MBBS from Guwahati Medical College and he did his MS from Regional Institute of Ophthalmology. He joined Shankar Dev Netralaya and he has been there since then. And he has been training. He got trained at Shankar Netralaya Chennai and at Moorfields Eye Hospital, London. He is actively involved in postgraduate teaching and glaucoma fellowship program for more than 2 decades now. He is the author and co-author of several articles published in national and international journals. I'm very grateful to you, Dr. Praful Sharma, for giving your time this evening for the postgraduates who will be seeing you live now. Over to Dr. Manish Singh.
Thank you, Dr. Satyajit. I'm personally very excited because all the 3 topics are really exciting. I think from PG point of view also, secondary glaucoma is a very common long question. Then madam will be discussing about neovascular glaucoma, again very difficult disease to handle. It's important not only for exam, for the practical life also. And personally, I have always enjoyed Dr. Harsh Kumar's talk on lasers. So I am very excited for today's webinar. Very good for PGs also. So we'll start with Praful Sharma, sir. Sir, slides, sir. You can please start your presentation.
Yeah, almost starting. Just so a very good evening to all of you, my fellow speakers, colleagues, and students, friends. So this class will be on secondary glaucoma, overview, diagnosis, and management. How common is secondary glaucoma? Actually, secondary glaucoma has received little attention in the population-based studies. In 1996, very quickly he projected that by the year 2000, there were 6 million secondary glaucoma patients in comparison to 67 million primary glaucoma patients. And you imagine after 20 years how big will be the figure. What is the Indian scenario? We have got several regional surveys. So we all know that there is no national survey on this. The West Bengal glaucoma study shows the lowest prevalence, that is 0.08%, and Orvin Comprehensive Eye Survey showed the highest prevalence, that is around 0.3%. Another study on the Indian population in Singapore, it showed the highest prevalence, that was the 0.55%. So these are the different forms of secondary glaucoma: lens-induced glaucoma, neovascular glaucoma, traumatic glaucoma, uveitic glaucoma, so and so forth. And if we look into the pattern of the uveitic secondary glaucomas, actually it has kept on changing in different parts of the world. The prevalence of secondary glaucoma will be different. So this is one study from a very prominent eye hospital from South India. There are 2000 statistics, 2000 data showed that the lens-induced glaucoma was the commonest at that time. It was 2.5%, and subsequently the other types of glaucomas like neovascular glaucomas, so and so forth. But with a very successful cataract surgery program, the lens-induced glaucoma has drastically calmed down. This is another study from a Serenity Eye Hospital, big Serenity Eye Hospital from Delhi, and by Dr. Sunita Dubey and others. In their study, they have shown that the highest prevalence of secondary glaucoma is for neovascular glaucoma. That was almost 17% of all glaucomas, and it was followed by trauma and lens-induced glaucoma. It came down to 12%. That is the third position. It has come down. Now, next, I will be actually discussing the different types of secondary glaucomas. During the process of discussion, I will try to cover the treatment part also. And but in some of the situations, I'll be discussing the treatment part as a whole. Neovascular glaucoma, I think my next speaker, she is a very prominent name, Dr. Gauri Moti. She will be speaking on neovascular glaucoma. So I think I will not be going into detail neovascular glaucoma. Only thing is that as far as I am concerned, neovascular glaucoma is one of the ocular emergencies, especially in those patients where there is visual potential. And once we get a case of neovascular glaucoma with good visual potential, we treat the patient as an emergency case. We send the patient for laser photocoagulation if the media is still visible. Otherwise, we'll refer the patient to Vitreoretina clinic and jointly manage this case. Now, the prevalence of neovascular glaucoma now we see with the control of diabetes and these intravitreal and these anti-VEGF injections, the diabetes-related neovascular glaucoma is coming down. We see more cases of CRVO. I think all these things will be discussed in details by my colleague. Now I will be discussing the lens-induced glaucoma part. So lens-induced glaucoma can be both open and closed-angle glaucoma. The common varieties of lens-induced glaucoma are phacolytic glaucoma, phacomorphic glaucoma, glaucoma due to displaced lens, lens particle glaucoma, and phacoanaphylaxis. These are the commonest varieties we see very frequently. And phacolytic glaucoma is the most common out of all this. This basically results from neglected mesial cataract, usually acute onset in one eye, pain and deafness along with tearing. Patient usually gives history of cataract or loss of vision for varying duration. On examination, we will find conjunctival hyperemesia. There will be diffuse corneal edema. Anterior chamber will be deep with heavy flare. Chunks of white material over the iris will be visible. Rarely acidohypopyon-like structure will be seen. And on examination, sometimes most of the times we find the hypermesure or hypermesure Morganian type of cataract. Many times it is impossible almost to look into the nucleus. Some of these patients they need ultrasonography, and ultrasonography, this kind of ultrasonography may reveal low refractive echoes in the anterior vitreous cavity. Next is your phacomorphic glaucoma. Phacomorphic glaucoma usually occurs in small eyes. These eyes are more prominent. These are more prone to develop phacomorphic glaucoma. Intumiscence of the lens is the most common cause. The glaucoma may be caused by enhanced pupillary block. There may be progressive shallowing of the anterior chamber, and as a whole, the anterior chamber may be shallow and angle closure can occur. Patient usually present with acute onset of pain and redness with variable reduction of vision. There may be mild to severe corneal edema, and lens is intumescent. Anterior chamber angle is closed. People can do gonioscopy. Many times gonioscopy in the first visit is not possible. If you have a look at the other eye, if it is not already operated for cataract, the other eye will give you some clue for diagnosis. The angle of the anterior chamber in the other eye may be either normal or it may be slightly narrow. That means these eyes are anyway prone. Then next is lens particle glaucoma. Typically, this is associated with disruption of the lens capsule by cataract extraction or after injury. The onset of intraocular pressure elevation usually occurs soon after the primary event. The raised intraocular pressure is due to direct obstruction of the trabecular measure. Phacoanthogenic glaucoma is the fourth variety. It has another name. Previously, it was known as phacoanaphylaxis. As in case of lens particle glaucoma, there is usually a history of traumatic rupture of the lens, or there may be extracapsular cataract extraction. The only distinguishing feature is that there will be a latent period. And during this latent period, actually there will be sensitization of the body to the lens method. The typical findings is usually chronic relentless granulomatous type of inflammation, which centers around the lens material in the primarily involved eye or in the fellow eye after it has undergone extracapsular surgery. Most patients present with moderate AC reaction with capes on both endothelium and lens. Glaucoma is usually a rare feature. Now, glaucoma due to altered lens position. This topic actually I will be discussing along with your traumatic glaucoma also. So what happens? The normal position of the lens may alter in terms of anterior dislocation, it may be posterior dislocation, or it may be slight displacement or subluxation. So it can cause both open angle as well as closed angle glaucoma. As you can see in this photograph, the whole lens has come to the anterior chamber. In this patient, the patient probably has the subluxation inferiorly. As a result, the iris is pushed forward, causing angle closure glaucoma. Long-standing posterior dislocation can cause phacolytic glaucoma also. Now, how do we manage the cases of lens-induced glaucoma? Topical steroid along with cycloplegics is the mainstay of treatment. Beta blockers, adrenergic agonists, and carbonic anhydrase inhibitors will be helpful. Definitive treatment is obviously removal of the offending lens or lens method. In those cases where there is phacomorphic glaucoma or the dislocated or subluxated lens has got pupillary block, a laser PI may be very helpful. In those cases of phacomorphic glaucoma, it can be preceded by laser PI and cataract surgery afterwards. The continuation of anti-glaucoma medications may be necessary in many patients for lifelong, but in some of them, they will actually completely recover. And let us talk something about traumatic glaucoma. Trauma in any form, partially from any form of trauma, can cause glaucoma, either directly or indirectly. The commonly seen different types of trauma are blunt injury, penetrating injury, chemical injury, radiation, and electrical injury. Out of this, we find blunt injury more common. A variety of mechanisms are involved in cases of traumatic glaucoma. There will be direct injury to the trabecular mesosclerosis in terms of trabecular dialysis or trabecular injury. There may be hyphema, iritis, or inflammation of the anterior chamber may contribute. Or as you can see earlier, the lens may be completely dislocated. There may be vitreous in the anterior chamber or pupil causing pupillary block. Angle recession can occur and glaucoma may result many years, months to years later. So what happens in inflammation? There will be obstruction of the angle by inflammatory cells and protein. Trabecular mesosclerotic cells may be swollen and ultimately it can cause sclerosis and decreased aqueous outflow, and intraocular pressure may permanently rise after inflammation in some cases. Usually the patient recovers with anti-inflammatory and cycloplegics and aqueous suppression drugs. What about hyphema? This is one of the commonest form of traumatic glaucoma that you see. Usually it is caused by tear in the anterior face of the ciliary body. There is a relationship with actually the size of the hyphema and risk of rise of intraocular pressure. When the hyphema is full, reports have said that the risk of raised IOP or glaucoma is around 52%. And when it is less than half chamber, it is around 13.5%. Some other probable consequences of hyphema could be amblyopia in case of young patients. There may be corneal blood staining. How do we manage hyphema cases? Hyphema, usually for management of hyphema, mild to moderate hyphema, ambulatory management with limited activity is advocated. But in very severe cases or in those cases where recurrent hyphema occurs with sickle cell disease, then in those cases it is advised that the patient should be on complete bed rest and patient should be hospitalized. Drugs with antiplatelet activity should be avoided. Topical aqueous suppressants with systemic other steroids, these will be helpful. We should remember that in cases of sickle cell disease, we should never prescribe carbonic anhydrase inhibitor because that can cause increased sickling due to systemic acidosis. Now, what is the indications for surgical evacuation of the hyphema? Because merely presence of hyphema does not need its removal. So some indications are when the intraocular pressure remains more than 50 millimeter of mercury for 5 days, intraocular pressure more than 35 millimeter of mercury for 7 days, and total hyphema unresolved for 9 days, along with corneal blood staining. So these are some indications where actually we should take the patient to operation theater and plan for a evacuation of hyphema. Now, what about angle recession glaucoma? It is reported, angle recession is reported to occur in 60 to 90% of the patients with traumatic hyphema. And glaucoma typically occurs months to years later. The incidence of angle recession glaucoma is directly related to the amount of angle recess. It is 4%. It is said that it is 4% if the angle recession is less than 180 degree, and around 10% if the angle recession is more than 180 degree. Usually, medical treatment consists of beta blockers, alpha-2 agonists, carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. The best surgical option is actually filtering surgery when the glaucoma cannot be controlled with medications. Now, glaucoma caused by lens injury. This actually I have already discussed under the lens-induced glaucoma, so I will not repeat it. But what are the glaucomas following penetrating trauma? Elevated intraocular pressure may result from a variety of factors in cases of penetrating injury, flared anterior chamber, inflammation, intraocular hemorrhage, lens injury, vitreous in AC, retained intraocular foreign body, or epithelial downward. This all can cause rise of intraocular pressure. The treatment of these cases will depend actually on the extent of injury and at what time you get the patient. Usually, if the patient you get immediately, you give topical corticosteroid, antibiotics, both systemic and local, and anti-glaucoma medications. You prepare the wound and you observe the patient. Subsequently, you can plan for definitive treatment, and the other injuries, other mechanisms which has caused raised intraocular pressure, if this is eliminated by subsequent management, then the glaucoma also may be under control. But many of these cases, they need either surgical intervention or lifelong medical treatment. Now, something about glaucoma due to chemical injury. We all know that alkali burn is more dangerous than acid burn. Initially, with alkali burn, initially there will be a phase of high IOP followed by a period of hypotony, and ultimately the IOP again starts rising. So in cases of severe alkali burn, what happens? The IOP never recovers from the hypotonous state, and the patient may go to icicle stage if you can't manage properly. So treatment is immediately you do copious irrigation, steroid, cycloplegics, aqueous suppressions, and hyperosmotics are the treatments. You should also remember that topical medications may impair surface healing. The risk of stromal melting with steroid treatment has to be kept in mind. Now, glaucoma can occur following radiation into the periorbital structures. So elevated episteal venous pressure, neovascular glaucoma, and intraocular hemorrhage, these all can result from radiotherapy, and the management of glaucoma will be depending on the cause. Usually it does not differ from any primary or secondary glaucomas. Depending on the mechanism, the treatment will be given. Now, glaucoma due to electrical injury, what happens? There will be transient intraocular pressure rise in electrocuted patients, and usually elevated IOP, it comes down to normal level. Special treatment is not required. Elevated IOP is thought to occur as a result of liberation of iris pigments, venous dilatation, and contraction of the extraocular muscles. So all these factors may lead to transient rise of intraocular pressure, and with time, the intraocular pressure usually comes down to normal, and special treatment usually is not required. Now, let us talk something about uveitic glaucoma. Glaucoma occurs in about 10% of the cases of uveitis. The risk of intraocular pressure elevation varies largely based on the type of uveitis, age of presentation, chronicity of the disease, and severity of disease. Anterior uveitis, older age of presentation, and chronic inflammation, these are some added risk factors for higher prevalence. So the mechanism of rise of intraocular pressure in uveitic glaucoma can be both open angle as well as closed angle mechanism. Trabecular mesos obstruction, pupillary block due to posterior synechia. Then there may be increased fibrinousness, exudates. There may be even hypema. There may be neovascularization, peripheral anterior synechia. All these factors can lead to raised intraocular pressure in uveitic glaucoma. Steroid is another cause of raised intraocular pressure in uveitic glaucoma. In this photograph, we can see intraocular steroid. It has come down. It has come to the anterior chamber. There is intractable secondary glaucoma. Another case of periocular steroid injection. It has migrated anteriorly, causing secondary glaucoma. Some specific uveitic entities you can discuss. These are sarcoidosis, Fuchs' uveitis syndrome, Postner's Grossman, then herpetic keratouveitis, and juvenile idiopathic arthritis. Out of this, we'll be talking about juvenile rheumatoid arthritis because it is one of the most serious problems. 5 to 10% of the uveitic patients are actually children, and 5 to 13.5% of children with uveitis, they develop secondary glaucoma. And glaucoma is a serious complication with at least one of the eyes having a vision of 20/200 or less. In one study, it was found. In sarcoidosis, the glaucoma occurs in around 10% of the cases. Raised intraocular pressure is usually results from obstruction of the trabecular mesoc by inflammatory debris and iris nodules. In a more chronic form, there may be iris bombi and pus formation. Neovascularization of the iris is also reported to be a cause in sarcoidosis. Presence of glaucoma is a poor prognosis. You have to remember, out of 11 cases, out of 11 patients, 8 patients can develop severe visual loss in cases of glaucoma with sarcoidosis. Something about Fuchs' heterochromic iridocyclitis. Elevated iridocyclitis is seen in 13 to 59% cases. The angle is typically open and free of peripheral anterior synechia. Fine vessels may be seen in the angle extending up to the trabecular meso. Glaucoma associated with Fuchs' uveitis usually does not respond to steroid therapy and needs medical or surgical management. Another common type of uveitic glaucoma that we see is a Postner's Grossman syndrome. Intermittently, the patient will have blurring of vision, and there will be very mild pain, or there may not be any pain at all. And on examination will be seeing mutton fat capes, moderate size, and there will be hardly any congestion. AC will be almost white, or there may be mild AC reaction. and the actually the attack usually subside within few days, even without any treatment. But if you decide to treat, especially in recurring cases, you have to give NSAID and aqueous suppression. This is helpful. One thing we must remember: after recurrent attacks of post-Nast-Schlossman syndrome, the patient may have permanent reduction in facility of outflow, and the patient may have a permanent rise of intraocular pressure. So that point we have to keep in mind. In that case, we have to manage the case as a case of secondary open-angle glaucoma. Pars is another uveitis which can cause glaucoma in 7 to 8% cases. The possible mechanism of raised IOP is actually neovascularization of the anterior segment, posterior synechia, and iris bone deformation. Peripheral anterior synechia also can occur in some cases. Now, how to manage glaucoma in uveitis cases? The management of glaucoma in uveitis cases is usually difficult. You have to keep in mind about the main disease, that is uveitis part, along with the treatment of glaucoma. It is usually cycloplasics and steroids are usually enough in many cases. The intraocular pressure will automatically come down with subsiding of uveitis. In cases where prolonged steroid therapy is required and the patient is thought to develop steroid-induced glaucoma, in these cases it is always helpful that you switch over to immunosuppressive. At least with low dose of immunosuppressive, you can reduce the dose of steroid. And before that, of course, you can try with low strength steroids like chloromethadone or low loteprednolone. These all you can try first. In treatment, you should remember that pilocarpine should never be used. And prostaglandin analogs, it is not a complete no-no. You can use prostaglandin analogs in those cases where other medicines are not sufficient, but the uveitis has to be wide and you have to be very vigilant. Laser peripheral iridectomy, it may be required in some cases of uveitic glaucoma. Only thing is that you have to do multiple PI, and the PI again closes, every time it closes you have to redo it. Some of the cases they may need surgical PI. And whenever possible, if you decide to go for incisional surgery, this surgery should be done in a white eye. Filtering surgery should be augmented with mitomycin C and releasable sutures. In uveitic glaucoma, glaucoma drainage device has a very big role to play. Now let us talk a little bit about drug-induced glaucoma. When we talk about drug-induced glaucoma, first comes to our mind about the steroid-induced glaucoma. The other drugs like topiramate, a sulfonamide derivative, it can cause bilateral shallowing of the anterior chamber, as you can see in this case. Bilateral shallowing of the anterior chamber causing forward displacement of the lens iris diaphragm and secondary angle closure if it does not treat it, and if it does not reverse, secondary angle closure glaucoma can occur. In those cases, actually, we should withdraw the offending agent. We should also think about the non-steroidal agents such as antipsychotropics, antidepressants, MAO inhibitors, antihistaminics, antispasmolytics, and mydretics. These mydretics, many times you see in our clinics, the residents, they put dilation drops and cause angle closure glaucoma. Now, steroid-induced glaucoma, especially what happens when the dexamethasone or betamethasone 0.1 to 0.1% is given 3 to 4 times for a period of 3 to 6 weeks. In a study, it was seen that the population responded in 3 ways. A trimodal response was seen. About 2/3 of the patients, they were found to have low responder, where intraocular pressure increase was less than 5 millimeter of mercury, and 4 to 5 or 6% of the patients were high responder. That means the intraocular pressure greater than 50 millimeter of mercury is seen in almost 4 to 5% of the patients. 1/3 of the patients, they were intermediate responders, that is intraocular pressure rose by 6 to 15 millimeter of mercury. Patients with primary open-angle glaucoma, ocular hypertension, or family history of glaucoma, these are all high-risk cases for steroid response. Clinical features, actually these patients are diagnosed on routine examination. The findings and treatment, it does not differ much from other secondary open-angle glaucomas. Only thing is that you should withdraw the steroid, and that may be enough for control of glaucoma. But some patients, they may need long-term anti-glaucoma medications. Now, glaucoma, little bit glaucoma following ocular surgeries. Ocular surgery in any form, it can cause rise of intraocular pressure, either directly or as a result of treatment. We have seen cataract surgery can cause glaucoma, lasers can cause glaucoma, different vitreoretinal surgeries, corneal transplantation, all these surgeries can directly or indirectly can cause glaucoma, and both open angle as well as angle closure glaucoma can be. As you can see in this photograph, the anterior vitreous space blocking the pupil, it causes narrow angle glaucoma, and on the same day, after laser PI, the has released. Another patient, following here, this patient actually reported following ear capsulotomy with sudden pain, see a little bit of vision, the reduction of vision and haziness, a little bit of redness. Following ear capsulotomy 2 days earlier, on examination, the patient was found that the patient had angle closure glaucoma. A good slit lamp photography showed that the patient had actually vitreous coming into the pupil, and it blocked the pupil. As a result, the glaucoma occurred and a PI actually released, and you can see a large capsulotomy was done, and through the capsulotomy, vitreous came and it blocked the pupil. This is another interesting case. This is a capsular back distension. If you can see, this is the posterior border, posterior surface of the IOL, and this distance is distended. This patient actually it presents as angle closure glaucoma. If you can diagnose the patient, the treatment is very easy. You can make a capsulotomy, and of course sometimes you have to do anterior capsulotomy also. The IOP will come down. Single piece hydrophobic lens, when put in the sulcus, it should never be done. Sometimes it can cause. I do not have many slides. I've got only few slides. So we should never put a single piece hydrophobic lens in the sulcus. It can cause secondary angle closure glaucoma. As you can see in this case, this is a post-PI picture, and following PI we dilated, we found that a hydrophobic single piece lens was in the sulcus. Hair surgery can cause glaucoma by different mechanisms. As you can see here, silicone oil, then a saponified silicone oil, then anteriorly migrated buccal, these all can cause glaucoma. So these exfoliation syndrome and pigmentary glaucoma, I think I will not go into details. These we see in routine day-to-day practice, actually, very commonly. Corneal disorders, another cause. There is episteal venous pressure. This can be a cause of secondary open angle glaucoma, intraocular tumor, cyst. So these are all cases of glaucoma. Only 1 or 2 lines about epidemic dropsy. We usually, most of the patients probably have not seen these cases. In 1998, one epidemic occurred, and 65 deaths occurred. Almost 2,552 cases were seen in Delhi. So management of secondary glaucoma, basically I have covered along with the disease. Only thing is that we should rule out the primary glaucoma also, never neglect the other eye. If you can diagnose the glaucoma at the earliest stage and manage appropriately, the glaucoma may be cured for whole life, unlike in primary glaucomas. So we should diagnose early and follow up these cases very meticulously. I think my time up. I have already taken 2 minutes. Thank you so much for giving me time and patient hearing. Thank you, Manish.
Sir, I think it was a very comprehensive presentation, because there are so many things to be covered in secondary glaucoma. And sometimes I feel secondary glaucoma treatment is far more difficult than a primary glaucoma, where the focus is just to control the pressure. But here, along with controlling the pressure, you have to also treat the cause of glaucoma. So it's like the treatment is more complicated. There's one question for you, sir, by Dr. Shreya, that what is Poshner-Shosman syndrome? And then we'll go to the presentation by Dr. Gauri Murthy. Dr. Praful Sharma, sir?
Yeah, Poshner-Shosman syndrome actually is. Hello, can I answer?
Yeah, please, sir.
Yeah, Poshner-Shosman syndrome is actually labeled as a case of as a form of uveitic glaucoma. The etiopathogenesis is not known. It is found that maybe a viral etiology may be there. What happens? The patient, as I say, patient periodically develops transient, very high rise of intraocular pressure, maybe above 30 or so. And this patient, after a few days, the intraocular pressure again comes down. The exact cause and exact cause is not known. Viral etiology is thought to be responsible in such cases.
Thank you, sir. We have one more question, but we'll take at the end of all the presentation. So, Dr. Satji, sir,
Okay,
we'd like to introduce Gauri Murthy. Yeah, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Praful Sharma, sir. Thank you so much for
Thank
your
you,
nice.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We would now like to move on to our next speaker, Dr. Gauri Murthy. I take special honor, privilege, and pride in welcoming her for this program because I have known her family, her father-in-law, her husband, and her entire family for the last 25 to 30 years since my postgraduate days. And Praveen and Krishna are close friends. Dr. Murthy did her DNB and she has done an FRCS also. She is a consultant at Prabha Eye Clinic, Bangalore, and of Bitla International Institute of Ophthalmology. She is the author and co-author for the best paper in GSI conferences in 4 conferences: 2003, 5, 7, and 10. She has published in peer-reviewed national and international journals almost 14 publications till date. She is the reviewer for ophthalmology, Journal of American Academy of Ophthalmology, Saudi Journal of Ophthalmology, and Indian Journal of Ophthalmology. Most noteworthy what Prabha Eye Clinic is known for in entire Karnataka and India is the telemedicine project that they have, which is called Naina, which empowers rural and semi-urban ophthalmologists in Karnataka for providing glaucoma care. It's a project to which is very dear to them, and she has been attached to it since 2006. Her research interests are newer diagnostic surgical management of adult and congenital glaucomas and endoscopic cytophotocoagulation and quality of life in glaucoma. We are so honored and so privileged to have you, Dr. Murthy. Thank you so much for being with us. Dr. Manish.
Thank you, Dr. Satjit. I think we will not take any further time and we'll move to the presentation by Dr. Gauri Murthy. Mr. Manish Gupta, that there is some audio issue, some background sound is coming, so you can mute all the participants and Madam can unmute herself.
Okay, I'm muting all. I'm muting all the participants and as well as speakers. Sir.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Now you can unmute your mic, sir. Ma'am, you can unmute your mic now. Dr. Gauri, now you can unmute your mic.
Yeah, I have unmuted.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sinha and Dr. Manish. So my topic for today is neovascular glaucoma. So this is a subset of glaucoma which is attributed to new blood vessels obstructing the aqueous humor outflow. And this usually occurs in response to a stimulus, which is most commonly retinal ischemia. And it is mediated by VEGF and other mediators. So this being the overview, let's look at it in detail. So typically there is the invasion of the anterior chamber by a fibrovascular membrane. It is just not a blood vessel, it is a fibrovascular membrane. It initially obstructs the aqueous outflow in an open angle fashion. That is, these new vessels grow on the angle, but the angle is open. And later the fibrous membrane contracts and this produces synovial angle closure, and this leads to high intraocular pressure. So this is the course of the disease. And the conditions that commonly lead to neovascular glaucoma are many, but the most common out of them are vein occlusions, either central or branch retinal vein occlusion, proliferative diabetic retinopathy, and retinal ischemia due to carotid artery obstruction or central retinal artery occlusion. So these are the most common. The others that you see are the less common causes that can lead on to neovascular glaucoma. So what is important is that whenever there is this kind of a situation where there is retinal ischemia, there are certain mediators which are released. So main and the most important out of them are the vascular endothelial growth factor. So this is produced by the retinal glial cells, where there is an increase in the insulin growth 1 factor and therefore induction of VEGF when there is ischemia. And the non-pigmented ciliary epithelium is also another site of VEGF synthesis. So the retina and the non-pigmented ciliary epithelium produce VEGF. There are other factors which also contribute, like cytokine IL-6, basic fibroblast growth factor, endothelin, and TGF-beta 1 and 2. But the main factor is VEGF. The most important key is to detect the problem early. So in this, mandatory high magnification examination of the pupillary area before dilatation in all patients with diabetic retinopathy and vein occlusions or branch retinal vein occlusions is very, very important. Like you can see in this patient, unless you do an undilated high magnification exam, you will miss these small new blood vessels which are there at the pupillary margin. Gonioscopy is also very important before you dilate such patients. So let's go through 3 cases through which I will present to you the principles of management of neovascular glaucoma. So my first case is a 72-year-old male. He presented with complaints of decrease in vision in the right eye. He is a diabetic since 35 years and a hypertensive since 30 years. He is on insulin and oral hypoglycemic agents and telmisartan for his blood pressure. On examination, his best corrected visual acuity is 6/9 in both the eyes. In the anterior segment, you can see that the cornea is clear, but around the pupil, there are early new vessels which are developing over here. So you can see this fine red filiform vessels which are there. There is a mild flare in the anterior chamber. The intraocular pressure is 18 millimeters of mercury and the left eye is within normal limits. When we do a gonioscopy, we see that there is a development of new vessels in the angle, in the inferior angle in one area. So there are early new vessels in the angle. The dilated fundus examination shows early PDR. You can see NVD and a preretinal hemorrhage. So this patient typically has a diagnosis of an immature cataract and a new vessels in the iris and in the angle and has proliferative diabetic retinopathy. This patient does not have glaucoma at this point of time. So ideally, all these new vessels are picked up at this stage and treated. If that is done, then we can avert a lot of problems which occur due to neovascular glaucoma. So how would we manage this patient? In this patient, we would go ahead with panretinal photocoagulation, 3 sittings, and intravitreal anti-VEGF can be given if the retinal photocoagulation is taking a little time, or you want to give the anti-VEGF so that the new vessels regress very fast. You will closely monitor the intraocular pressure because these neovascular glaucomas can progress very fast. Within a day or two, they can progress so that what was 18 today, the intraocular pressure in a couple of days can go up to 30 or even higher than that. And close monitoring of the other eye, because this eye is also likely to follow. So you need to monitor the other eye for the development of PDR and for the development of new vessels in the angle. So this is essentially how you would manage such a early case. So let's look at medical management of neovascular glaucoma before going on to the next case. So the IOP lowering medications that we use in the medical management are aqueous suppressants mainly, topical beta adrenergic antagonists like timolol or betaxolol, brimonidine, and topical or oral carbonic anhydrase inhibitors like acetazolamide and dorzolamide and brinzolamide. Prostaglandin analog should be avoided because this leads to further breakdown of the blood aqueous barrier, and this leads to worsening of the intraocular inflammation. Pilocarpine is also contraindicated because of its pro-inflammatory nature. Oral carbonic anhydrase inhibitors can be given, but please check the renal parameters. Many of these patients also have renal issues due to diabetes. Topical atropine can be used for cycloplegia because this stabilizes the blood ocular barrier and it reduces the inflammation and reduces the incidence of hyphema as well. Topical corticosteroids in a small dosage like dexamethasone 0.1% 4 times a day will reduce any inflammatory component that is present. So this is in essence the principles of medical management of early neovascular glaucoma or any neovascular glaucoma. Most importantly, one should treat the underlying cause. So panretinal photocoagulation reduces the VEGF production and causes a permanent reduction in the ischemic angiogenic stimulus. And regression of rubeosis occurs in 4 to 6 weeks. So this is indicated in established cases of PDR and ischemic CRVOs with 2 clock hours of NVI or NVA. Intravitreal anti-VEGF is one of the game changers in the management of neovascular glaucoma. When we give this intravitreal anti-VEGF, it leads to temporary reduction in the angiogenic stimulus, and there is a very fast regression of the rubeosis within 24 to 48 hours. So PRP takes time, whereas this anti-VEGF can act very fast. So this is one of the game changers which has led us to maintain vision in many of these intractable neovascular glaucoma cases. In cases where there is ischemia due to ocular ischemia syndrome, PRP will not benefit. Here, the root cause, which is the carotid blockage, should be treated. Let's go on to the second case. This is a lady, a 65-year-old lady. She came to us with pain and redness and decreased vision in the left eye. She has undergone a phacoemulsification with IOL in 4 months back, both the eyes. She is also a diabetic, 15 years, hypertensive, 18 years, and a ischemic heart disease since 5 years. So she is on oral hypoglycemic agents and amlodipine. So on examination, right eye has a visual acuity of 6.6, left eye 6.12. Anterior segment in the right eye is normal. This is the left eye which we will be discussing. So in the anterior segment, again, you can see there are these fine new vessels. Here, they are there on the temporal aspect. Can you see these new vessels here? So this is in high magnification. So these are the new vessels which are picked up on high magnification examination. The IOP in the right eye is normal, whereas in the left eye, it is high. It is 32 millimeters of mercury. The gonioscopy in the left eye showed synechiae. You can see that this angle is almost completely closed in 2 quadrants, and there is new vessels in the angle as well. The fundus shows proliferative diabetic retinopathy. So you can see this large frond of blood vessel which is there, which is arising from next to the disc. So this patient has proliferative diabetic retinopathy and neovascular glaucoma in the left eye. So many times when a patient with early PDR undergoes a cataract surgery, the speed in which this progresses, the diabetic retinopathy, is faster. So they will go on to develop sometimes NVG like we are seeing in this patient. See, the points in this patient is that she has good visual acuity. Her visual acuity is 612, and already the intraocular pressure is elevated. It is 30 plus. And here the angle closure is there. Synechial angle closure is there. So these are the things that you consider. So how would you manage? You have to manage the underlying pathology by PRP and give intravitreal anti-VEGF. But here the speed in which you do things is very, very important. It should be immediate. So this patient, I would immediately give an intravitreal anti-VEGF and medically treat her with aqueous suppressant, timolol drops, brimonidine and dorzolamide, and systemic acetazolamide if she can tolerate, along with atropine and dexamethasone. And after that, one would go ahead with the PRP. So post anti-VEGF, after maximal medical treatment, her pressure still remained at 34 to 40 millimeters of mercury, despite 3 sittings of PRP being done. So here it's very, very important that we do not delay, as we have to progress to the next method of intervention. So at this point of time, the options are a trab with MMC or a AGV implant. So all these things, the steps should be taken immediately, one after another. Even these 3 sittings of PRP are not required to be completed if you feel that the new vessels are not regressing or the pressure is not budging despite your maximal medication which has been given. So you can go ahead and do the trab, and your retinal colleague can complete the PRP later on. So surgical management in the management of neovascular glaucoma. Let's look at this. So the surgical management is essentially either by trabeculectomy with antifibrotic agents, which is mitomycin C, or glaucoma drainage devices, or cyclophotocoagulation. The choice of surgery depends on the clinical presentation. So the intraocular pressure at presentation, the stage of NVG, the degree of angle closure, the severity of the optic neuropathy, the visual potential, and the degree of inflammation. These are the things that will determine what is the surgical option that you will take. So surgical options, trabeculectomy, it is always done with a mitomycin C. Earlier, it used to be associated with the high risk of failure, but now with the advent of intravitreal anti-VEGF injections, it improves the success rate considerably. Also, to prevent hyphema due to sudden decompression intraoperatively, one can use pre-placed sutures or even viscoelastic substances. Typically, you give the VEGF injection, and within 24 or 48 hours later, you go ahead and do the surgery as you would do with a trabeculectomy in any other case. Close follow-up is required. You can use releasable sutures or laser suture lysis for IOP titration in the early post-op period. With the usage of anti-VEGF, you get these diffuse, thick blebs, not the thin blebs that you usually see. And these patients, when the trap succeeds, tend to do quite well. Glaucoma drainage devices, when you have a synechial angle closure, one would prefer to go in for a glaucoma drainage device rather than a trabeculectomy. So wherever you have scarred conjunctiva, active inflammation, where there's advanced and florid rubeosis and prior failed trap, here the implants are recommended. So there are various implants which are available. The main ones that we use are the AGV and the Barwelt implant. Here again, we use intravitreal anti-VEGF at least 24 to 48 hours prior to the surgery. And Barwelt or Adi valve gives slightly lower pressures compared to the AGV, but both are used. It is the discretion of the surgeon. The complications are early post-op hypotomy, blockage of the tube and fibrous encapsulation. It is like with any other tube implant. But this does give very good results when you combine it with anti-VEGFs and the management of the retinal condition. The video you saw was an Adi implant along with a scleral patch graft. Let's go to the third case. This is a 69-year-old male. He came with pain in the right eye and a one-sided headache with a loss of vision in the right eye. He has had laser for diabetic retinopathy in both the eyes. He has had anti-VEGF intravitreal injections in the left eye 1 year back, followed by further laser. He's a diabetic of 25 years, has nephropathy on dialysis, is a hypertensive and a ischemic heart disease patient. So this is the anterior segment picture of his right eye. The vision is nopial and the intraocular pressure is 52 millimeters of mercury. And you can see these extensive rubeosis along with ectropion uvea. This is a end stage or absolute neovascular glaucoma. We don't want to see this. So it's very imperative that we pick up the cases at the level that the previous two cases were. In the left eye, the best corrected visual acuity is 624. There is ectropion uvea, no NVI, mid-dilated pupil, and the pressure is under control with medical management. Gonioscopy shows open angles. And the fundus right eye, there is very hazy view, and left eye is status post PRP stable. So here, the left eye is doing well with medical management. There is regressed NVI, but in the right eye, you have absolute NVG with PDR status post PRP. So the treatment options here are transscleral cyclophotocoagulation or cyclocryotherapy or cyclodestruction. So you can do interim medical management with aqueous suppressants, topical steroids or cycloplegics, but here one would not go in for a trabeculectomy or a glaucoma drainage device. You would lean towards cyclodestruction. So let's look at cyclodestructive procedures in the management of neovascular glaucoma. These are indicated in refractory NVG with poor visual prognosis. However, endoscopic cyclophotocoagulation can be done in patients with good visual potential as well. Here, there is destruction of the ciliary body, epithelium and stroma with consequent reduction in the aqueous humor production and reduced IOP. So you can do TSCPC with either the semiconductor diode laser or non-contact and VAG laser, or endoscopic cyclophotocoagulation as is being shown here. So here you use a probe which combines all three functions, the illumination, the laser and the video endoscope. You visualize the ciliary body and you photocoagulate that directly with the endpoint of whitening and shrinkage of the ciliary processes. This ECP can be combined with pars plana vitrectomy as well. So in summary, the management principles are early diagnosis, treat the early underlying cause, consider prompt treatment with intravitreal anti-VEGF, and interim medical management and definitive medical management. The game changer, as I have been reiterating, is the anti-VEGF and early diagnosis and prompt management. So to conclude, NVG is a potentially blinding disease, but can give good results with prompt management, and early diagnosis and timely intervention are crucial. The main strategy is prevention of NVG by properly treating the underlying causative devices. Thank you very much, and I would be happy to answer any questions that may arise.
Thank you so much, madam. I think it was a really very lucid presentation, and all the three case scenarios of early, moderate, and end stage neovascular glaucomas were fully covered. We have one question: intracameral anti-VEGF, is it useful in
Yeah.
neovascular glaucoma?
See, when you are giving anti-VEGF intracamerally, the turnover rate is very high of aqueous humor. So the action doesn't last. So you should be giving it intravitreally. Also, the retina is the source of the VEGF which is produced. And if you give it intravitreally, it is going to stay for a longer time and it's going to act like a reservoir and give the anti-VEGF. And this is going to lead to regression of the new vessels in the retina and in the iris and the angle. So it's always preferred to give it intravitreally.
One very important point you highlighted, that the treatment of neovascular glaucoma should be immediate. Because a lot
Yes.
of time we have seen patients have been given a PRP date after 3-4 days, or a medicine has been started with a 50 pressure and IOP has been rechecked after 4-5 days. So this is very important point. All the postgraduates should understand that all patients with neovascular glaucoma every day is vital, because we are dealing with very high pressures. One more point, madam, you highlighted that, I think, madam, you need to unmute your mic. Madam.
Yeah, I have unmuted. Yeah.
You highlighted was in patient with extensive synechia.
Yes.
Like second case you shared, where you want to do a surgical intervention like a trab or a Amath glaucoma fault. So a lot of time we have seen patient with extensive synechia, the chamber also becomes shallow, and phakic eye becomes very tricky, because doing a trab also is not easy, and in a shallow chamber, doing AGB also is not easy.
Yeah.
So how
in
you
that, yeah. That's a very important point, Dr. Manish. In that situation, what I usually do is to implant the tube into the sulcus. So once you insert it, you go behind iris, because the iris is not flabby in such eyes. Because of the fibrovascular membrane, it's quite stiff. So you just insert it in the sulcus just so that the tip is seen at the pupillary edge. Or so that should be in a pseudophakic eye. This cannot be done in a phakic eye. But generally, these eyes are pseudophakic and you can put it in the sulcus. The other option is, if the patient has undergone a thorough pars plana vitrectomy as management of the retinal condition, you can also implant the valve into the pars plana. So that is also another option. It's very, very true that the anterior chamber becomes very shallow, and trying to put the tube into the anterior chamber can lead to endothelial problems, and other issues can come up.
Thank you, madam. We have a few questions, but we'll take it at the end of the presentation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Be there in the webinar.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gaurimurthy, for that amazing presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now we have our next speaker with us, Dr. Harsh Kumar, who we are so honored to have with us. He's a doyen in glaucoma, and I would like to take this privilege and honor to introduce him. First, I should begin by letting all the audience know that he is a Padam Shri awardee, which is a big honor for the whole ophthalmology fraternity by itself, and we are very honored to have him today. He did his MBBS from AIIMS, and he did also his MD from RP Center, and he got the Best Resident Award also over there. He was the additional professor of glaucoma unit at RP Center formerly, and he has also been the president of the Glaucoma Society of India. He has more than 70 publications in index journals, and his laser procedures are known worldwide, what Manish was saying just now. And it was described for the first time in world literature, and one of the Bibles, which is Shields of Glaucoma textbook, Dr. Harsh's laser procedure is mentioned in that also, which is a big honor for India by itself. He performs most complicated glaucoma surgeries, procedures using the latest technology, and he was conferred the International Medical Scholar Program Award in USA, and he also got the award of the Icon Ethical Healthcare Award at Health Conclave in Chandigarh. It's such an honor to have Dr. Harsh Kumar with us. If I had to read out his whole biodata, it would take ages. So I'd like to move on with the program and ask Manish to please proceed.
Thank you, Dr. Satyajit. I also don't want to waste any further time, because I was mentioning you personally. I have had an opportunity to listen to sir multiple times, but this is such a presentation about laser, which every time we want
अब आ गया
sir. please share your slides, sir.
हाँ एक मिनट.
And Mr. Gupta, I think we can switch off few of the participant videos, so it will help the software better.
अब आ रही हैं स्लाइड्स आ रही हैं क्या?
Actually,
The slide
that switching off rights are not there. That is an individual right to the participants.
Acha,
We need to
Manish,
request them.
स्लाइड्स आ रही हैं?
So we can request all the participants, if not required, they can turn off their cameras, and if they need to ask the question, then they can open it. Or we have the chat box option also. So I request all
Manish,
the
can you see my
participants if
slide?
they can put off their
sir, we
cameras.
can't just slide till now, sir.
नहीं दिख रही अभी.
Nahi dikh rahi, sir. Meanwhile, as Mr. Gupta was mentioning, we'll request all the participants to keep
Yes,
your
fine.
microphones muted and please
Mera-
switch off
mera
the
bhi-
video. Then the streaming will be better.
मनीष इसको अनम्यूट करना है मेरे उसको मेरा वीडियो जो है ना कैमरा इसमें इन्होंने म्यूट किया हुआ है मेरे से नहीं हो रहा है आई थिंक वहां से करना पड़ेगा.
Sir, you can unmute your mic, sir. No issues. You
Hey,
can click
mic
on the
नहीं,
mic icon
Mic
and
तो unmute किए. Video
माइक
शायद
अनम्यूट वीडियो मेरी तरफ से अनम्यूट नहीं हो रहा है.
anyone is sharing his video, we can maybe तो देख लीजिए.
Dr. Amit Chopra, I think the participant with the name Dr. Amit. I would request if you can turn off your camera.
Dr. Amit Chopra, if you can just switch off your camera, maybe by mistake he's sharing his screen.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Sir, now
Dr.
can you try?
हर्ष सर अभी आप शेयर करिए.
नहीं हो नहीं रहा यार.
You go to
अच्छा.
share screen एक बार सर.
ओके शेयर किया.
नीचे देखिए डेस्कटॉप होगा.
नहीं डेस्कटॉप तो मैंने ऑन कर दिया था. अब आ रहा है.
हाँ अब आ रहा है
आ गया.
आ गया. तो इसको बस इलाज कर दीजिए बस.
ठीक है डन.
परफेक्ट एकदम परफेक्ट.
Perfect.
ओके.
अच्छा भाई थैंक यू वेरी मच. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल डॉक्टर सिन्हा एंड अरे ये क्या हो गया भाई.
ठीक है सर आ रहा है एकदम.
आ रहा है पर मेरा हाइड हो गया शायद वो.
ओके एक बार इसको सर मिनिमाइज करके एक बार प्रेजेंटेशन ओपन कर लीजिए. नहीं तो
इसको मिनिमाइज किया और
प्रेजेंटेशन को फिर से ओपन कर लीजिए.
हाँ एक मिनट. तुम लोगों को पूरा दिख रहा है?
मुझे सर क्रोम दिख रहा है.
नहीं
एक
एक
बार
मिनट.
प्रेजेंटेशन को कहीं से ओपन कर लीजिए तो आ जाएगा.
स्टॉप शेयरिंग करके फिर से करता हूँ. एक
हाँ श्योर.
शेयर किया. स्क्रीन शेयर डेस्कटॉप एक मिनट.
यस
अब आ
गया.
आ गया.
हाँ सर आ गया.
यार ये अब आगे पीछे नहीं जा रहा. कुछ चक्कर है.
नीचे बाएं तरफ एक स्विच होगा सर. स्क्रीन में नीचे बाएं तरफ जाइए. नीचे लेफ्ट साइड में देखिए एक फॉरवर्ड बैकवर्ड का स्विच रहता है सर.
ये कौन कर रहा है? उधर से हो रहा है क्या?
हाँ अब चेंज हो रहा है सर.
हाँ ठीक है. ये मैं ही कर रहा हूँ ना, तुम लोग तो नहीं कर रहे?
आप ही कर रहे हैं.
ठीक है. अच्छा भाई थैंक यू सिन्हा साहब एंड पूजा एंड मनीष फॉर हैविंग मी हियर एंड सच वंडरफुल टॉक यार. मतलब जितना प्रफुल्ल ने कवर कर दिया वो तो कोई पॉसिबल ही नहीं था किसी के लिए इतना कवर करना. एंड गौरी एज यूजुअल इज सो परफेक्ट. सो बट एनीवे let us go on and say what we have to say. So we all know what lasers are. It is a monochromatic light, unidirectional, coherent. Okay, and more important is शायद कोई तुमसे पूछे कि भाई what are the gas lasers? The two important gas lasers are argon and krypton. But obviously helium and neon are also used as a toggling beam. क्योंकि कई हमारे लेजर कलर्ड नहीं होते तो उनके लिए हीलियम नियॉन बीम लगाई जाती है. And then there's a carbon dioxide laser. Solid state में सबसे important है Nd:YAG laser because this is the one which we are mostly using in glaucoma. And then we have the excimer laser, dye lasers and diode lasers. So somebody may ask you, what is photocoagulation? You keep talking photocoagulation. What is it? So essentially, the light energy is being converted into heat energy, and therefore it is denaturizing the proteins. So वो tissue को जला देता है वहाँ पे. So there is a burning effect over there. Photoablation is obviously for LASIK and all, so we are not talking about it. The other very, very important thing is Nd:YAG. So what does Nd:YAG do? A lot of energy is concentrated in a very, very small spot in a very small time, so that the atoms are stripped of their electrons, and what ultimately becomes is a plasma, that is the fourth state of matter. And then there is an micro explosion over there, which actually causes disruption of the tissues. So we are using it in open angle closure, and you have seen so beautifully Praful and Gauri have shown you how they are to be used in secondary glaucomas. So somebody may ask you, what is the wavelength of Q-switched Nd:YAG laser that we use? So it is 1064 nanometer, and this wavelength is invisible. So whenever you have to do something, you have to toggle it on with a helium neon beam, and it is seen as red beam, which has to be made 1. That means this is the place where your laser will be effective. So iridotomy is the commonest laser thing that we are performing laser procedure in India, because we have almost 40 to 50% of our patients are angle closure patients. So what questions they will ask? Should all angle closure undergo iridotomy? This is a very, very critical question. It can be a full length question, as a matter of fact. What is the pre-laser preparation for PI? What lens and what laser is required for PI? What are the settings of lasers to be used? What is the site we should choose? What is the complications overall, and what are the post-laser medications? So obviously we do it for angle closure glaucoma primarily, and obviously secondary glaucomas, as we have seen. Pigment dispersion syndrome, sometimes we do it, but it is not definitely perfect that we should use it. All of you should know what is the classification of PAC, PAC and PACG. So PACS, first of all, is a primary angle closure suspect, in which by definition, if you do a gonioscopy, 270 degree of the angles, you will not be able to visualize the posterior trabecular meshwork, or a pigmented trabecular meshwork, as we call it. Then we do an indentation, and once you press with a gonioscope, and that is why we tell to use the 4-mirror gonioscope. जब center में press किया, तो aqueous दोनों तरफ चला गया, and what you will see is that if it is a primary angle closure, the angle will open up. Primary angle closure suspect, then the angle will open up. In primary angle closure, it may open up, and yet there may be few areas in which there are peripheral anterior synechia, and despite your pressure, it may not open up. So primary angle closure and primary angle closure suspect, disc is normal, field is normal, pressure is normal by and large in primary angle closure suspect. But the should all primary angle closure suspects be taken up for peripheral iridotomy? And Dr. Panda's paper have shown that yes, it helps, because it doesn't allow it to convert into primary angle closure and PACG, that is glaucoma. But the problem is that there's a huge amount. If you almost above 40 years of age, almost 2 to 6% of the patients would be having PACS if you do gonioscopy. So that is an impossible task, and one actually should not do primary angle closure, all primary angle closure suspects peripheral iridotomy. So फिर किस में करना है? When should we do it? So if you really do a gonioscopy and you feel that the angles are really narrow, there is a family history of angle closure glaucoma, the other eye is already having angle closure, it is a one-eyed patient, he will need repeated dilatations because of fundus examinations, there is some history of IOP elevations, or you feel that the disc is not that good, then you can actually do a prone darkroom test and anterior segment OCT. But frankly speaking, none of the tests will give you a definitive idea. So you will have to actually decide during this whether a PACS should undergo an iridotomy. All PAC, that is primary angle closure, where disc is normal, the field is normal, yet there is a peripheral anterior synechiae or there are elevation of intraocular pressure, you will have to do an iridotomy. And all eyes, all fellow eyes which are actually looking completely normal but are having primary angle closure glaucoma in the other eye will have to be undergo an iridotomy. And obviously, if there's a disc and a field change, then it becomes primary angle closure glaucoma, and we will have to do it. But sometimes many people ask questions, sir, agar sara hi angle closed hai. If in a chronic angle closure glaucoma, the entire angle is closed, then there is no point doing an iridotomy because you're only spreading the pigment and further blocking the angle. So it is not really going to help, and maybe you will have to do a trabeculectomy in such a case. So by doing an iridotomy, we are actually taking care of a iris bombay element or the iridolentricular contact. But if it is a flat area and the angle is deep in the sense, and you do an iridotomy, even then the angle may still remain closed, and that is plateau iris. You will, despite doing an iridotomy, you will have elevation of pressure, in which we will have to do an iridoplasty, which we will talk later. And obviously, there's a third component of angle closure that, as Dr. Praful had already shown, that if a lens is coming forward, you will have to tackle the lens. And iridotomy will not help to begin with. So what is the pre-laser this thing? We have to have a consent. Please don't think it's a small procedure. We have to have the consent of the patient, control the intraocular pressure. It is always better to do an iridotomy in a soft eye. Pre-laser, we always put pilocarpine in one drop, put 2-3 times at 10-15 minutes interval to stretch out the iris so that we can do it easily. Always rule out the use of anticoagulants. If the patient is on anticoagulants, tell him to go back to the doctor who had started so that he can stop it for 4-5 days when things will become better and we can do an iridotomy. Always use an Abraham lens. It has a 56 diopter button. The lens, the contact lens will actually stabilize the eye, and cornea will be better because all irregularities will be taken care of. The beam will be shifted peripherally so that you can do a peripheral iridotomy, and that is why we always use a lens. How much energy is to be used? See, that is variable because if you have a completely new machine, even 5 millijoules may be okay. If you have a very old machine and the optics are not that good, even 12 millijoules may not suffice. The aim is to finish the iridotomy in 3 to 4 shots. If you try and do it in one shot, it may be so big an effect that you may cause lens subluxation, and we have seen it often. But if you do it with a very small, say 2 to 3 millijoules, what will happen is you will just chip superficially and the pigment will get dispersed in the angle, and you are in the AC and you will not be able to complete the iridotomy. What is the site? Initially, we used to say that it should be done covered by the lid so that an artificial pupil is not formed. But now what we have been seeing is that if it is at the edge of the lid, that is the place from where most of the light gets refracted and gets into trouble. So ideally, you can do it in any site wherever the angle is deepest and you have a crypt. If you find an easy area, do it. What is the end point of iridotomy? Somebody may ask, how do I know that my iridotomy is complete? While we are doing it, retroillumination is not a sure sign. There may still be things over there and it is not a complete thing. So you have to see that the moment you complete an iridotomy, there will be pigment coming out sudden, and there will be a sudden gush of aqueous and pigments, and the chamber will become deep. That will mean that the iridotomy is now complete. And you don't need a very large iridotomy. Almost 200 microns of iridotomy is more than enough. If you cannot, sometimes we add gonioplasty to iridotomy. If you, despite iridotomy, you feel that the angle is not deep enough and it can still close, or there is a plateau iris. So ideally what you do 2-3 weeks after you have done the iridotomy, you will call the patient and dilate the patient. Because many a times on gonioscopy, you may not be able to pick up whether it's a plateau iris, but the moment you dilate, the pressure will go up. and then you do a gonioscopy, and you will find that despite a PI being patent, it is getting closed, and then you do a gonioplasty, which we'll talk later. If the peripheral iridotomy is difficult, means there are no crypts or thin areas in the iris, what should you do? You should put more pilocarpine, and you can do, what you can do is an argan stretch technique, in which we give multiple shots of argan all around to create a drum head pattern. तो गोनियोप्लास्टी में क्या करते हैं, वही तरह के स्पॉट हम यहाँ पे लगाएंगे, मींस लार्जर स्पॉट्स 300 to 500 microns, lesser power 0.2 to 0.3 watts, 0.1 second, so that it will just stretch out. So once you stretch it out all along, it will just stretch in the center, and you put 1 or 2 spots by YAG, it will really open up. So that is known as argan pre-treatment. Invariably, when you do a treatment with the YAG, there will be some bleeding. Don't worry. On lens, it looks as if it's a huge bleeding, but when you take out the lens, you find it's just a trickle. But if it is coming, you just press the gonioscope and the bleeding will stop. But that's what we said, that some patients in which you have not checked for the anticoagulant, you may have a huge bleed, and sometimes I've seen people had to evacuate even. So be very, very careful about that. Another very important thing is there will be a pressure elevation, and the maximum pressure usually comes after 4 hours of doing an iridotomy. If you are doing an iridotomy where the disc is already compromised, please already give him, sometimes we even give a mannitol pre-operatively before doing a laser, because the eye should be soft. And whatever medications you want to use, you use, but the pressure should not get elevated, especially if it's a compromised eye. There could be a corneal haze localized. Usually, if you misjudge and fire onto the endothelium, usually it's a short problem only, but some people have reported long-term complications of endothelium. Cataract as a complication is very, very important. And that is one of the reasons why we are not right, left, and center doing iridotomy in all primary angle closure suspects. Because 4 to 5 years down the line, they may enhance the formation of cataract as compared to if the iridotomy was not done. So please be careful. Cataract formation is a thing which will occur. Post laser, once we have done the laser, we will give a steroid antibiotic drops for around a week. Also, we will keep putting pilocarpine in order to keep the hole stretched so that it doesn't get blocked by the pigment. And we have already talked that we'll give some extra medication so that the pressure does not rise. So these are the questions we have talked all about. If there's anything left, we will talk later. The second, so the most probably in your postgraduate exam, the most important question will be an iridotomy, because all examiners would be doing an iridotomy. The rest of the things that I show you will be much less asked for. Another important thing people will ask is argan laser trabeculoplasty, where some of the examiners must have done this. The ALT and now what is SLT, which is done only by specified machines. This was popularized by Weiss and Witter. And what exactly is this technique in which you take 50 micron spot of an argan laser, a coagulative laser, 0.1 second, and 0.8 to 1 watt of power. You give around 50 to 60 spots in 180 degrees inferiorly with the help of a gonioscope, and usually in anterior trabecular meshwork where the burns are gentle. And so exact mechanism is not known precisely, but the basic advantage of doing ALT is that in Indian eyes, it can usually lower the pressure by around 4 to 5, even 6 millimeters. Unfortunately, most of these eyes revert back, and within 6 months to 1 year, the pressure can come back. But the advantage would be in therapeutic crossroads. That is, patient has got all medications, but the pressures are a little above what you want, or the patient is having a steroid-induced glaucoma or pregnancy, conditions where you know that they will settle down with time and you just want to buy time. So specifically for pregnancy, where any medication can be harmful, ALT and SLT are wonderful situations to do, because you want to lower the pressure for certain time only. SLT, so somebody will ask you a question, what is the difference between ALT and SLT made by Latina and Parks? So what happens here is the ALT has got a spot size of 50 microns, SLT has 400 by. So you really do not focus SLT at all. Very easy to do. Just throw it into the angle and you're not worried because there is no damage over there. There's no thermal damage as is there in ALT. So the biggest thing about SLT you will say is the importance is, sir, that it can be repeatedly done. So once it fails over 6 months, 1 year, we can again do it. The angle is not actually getting damaged. The amount of energy used is extremely low. The problem with SLT is that a specific machine costing almost 20 lakhs is to be bought for doing SLT, whereas ALT can be done by any argon laser, and usually argon is lying with most of the retina surgeons. Again, the exact mechanism is not known, but the energy over here is absorbed by chromophore melanin, and macrophages are redistributed so that the things are opened up to a greater extent. So these are the questions. What are the indications for ALT and SLT? What is the difference between ALT and SLT? What is the exact mechanism, which is actually not very specific? And the rest of the things are not really important. DL, diode laser cyclophotocoagulation, which Gauri has clearly demonstrated, TSCP and TSCCP, what she was talking about. And obviously, as far as your examiners are concerned, you should stick to saying that we would prefer to do it in eyes in which no other procedure was possible. And so one can do it as a last resort, but yes, there are situations where seeing eyes are there and we cannot do anything else. So either you refer to the patient to Dr. Gauri Murthy, because she'll do a wonderful job from the internal aspect as she has shown, or you can do a very graded DLCP or a cyclophotocoagulation, meaning going only quadrant by quadrant, doing very lesser number of spots as compared to what is usually done. Because if you don't do it, patients can have a lot of problems. And so these are the lasers. Gauri has already shown all this. The problem is that eyes can go into vitreous hemorrhage, painful blind eye can be there, and phthisis can also occur. And I've seen some people being sued because the patient said that you never told me that. Obviously, you had already given the consent, but they will always keep harping that the eye is almost gone and shrunken. So be very, very careful about doing DLCP. Argon laser peripheral iridoplasty, as it is called, and it's also called gonioplasty. So be careful. These are two names of the same thing. And as I told you, large spot size with a coagulative laser, essentially an argon or a pea green Nd:YAG with a 562 nanometer wavelength. So you are giving a superficial spot, less energy, so that actually there is a charring, and this charring, as you can see, will constrict the iris superficially and open up the angle. So that is the idea of a gonioplasty. You can do without a gonioscope, or you can do with the help of a gonioscope. And classical example, if somebody asks you, sir, why will you do a gonioplasty? I will do it for a plateau iris. So in a situation where we have done an iridotomy, I dilate, and despite dilatation, you find that the angle is still being closed because the iris has come peripherally and blocked the angle. And in these situations, if you do an iridoplasty over here, then you can see that the angle over here can open up very, very nicely, deeply. And this you can see in anterior segment OCT, a narrow angle opens up very, very nicely when there is a spot of argon laser put over here. The biggest advantage I have found, though don't quote it easily because very few people do it, is if there's an acute angle closure like this, you can't do an iridotomy because everything is so hazy, and you can't do, and many a times with all the medications, mannitol, etc., the pressure will not go down. Now the option would be either to do a surgical something, but Dr. Lamb had shown this beautifully. It works. You do because the argan goes through this, and you can do all peripheral spots, and then you can see within 1 hour itself the whole thing settles down. So again, gonioplasty can be used classically for plateau-iris. It can also be used for at acute angle closure glaucoma, and sometimes even lens-induced and topiramate-induced glaucomas. While you are biding your time, you can do these procedures. Then malignant glaucoma. Again, what is the classical treatment? Dr. Praful had shown the malignant glaucoma classically. One can see that basically it's what happens in this case is that there is a rotation of the ciliary body so that the fluid keeps going posteriorly. So in this kind of a situation, what you have to do is essentially, if there is no lens, then you can break the posterior capsule and put the YAG shots so that this entire area is broken and the pockets are released, and then the fluid will flow through the posterior capsulotomy that you have made. Or sometimes there is a peripheral iridotomy, and you can do the same from over there. So the first step is to give atropine, steroids, and anti-glaucoma medication. That is not working, then you go on to anterior hyalodotomy or laser vitreolysis. And if that doesn't work, then you have to go on to laser photocoagulation, like Gauri had shown. So in this case, this is what you do: a posterior capsulotomy, and do the capsulotomy right till the edge of the lens. Because sometimes even when you do a vitreolysis, the fluid cannot escape, and unless there is a flow from the periphery over here. And once that is done, and you can do it sometimes in a big iridotomy if it is available over there, you can see a shallow anterior chamber with very high pressure suddenly becomes deep and the eye becomes quiet. So what is the presentation of malignant glaucomas? What is the first line of management? How do you use a laser in this? And if laser does not work, vitrectomy and cyclophotocoagulation are the options. This, I'm sure, this is a procedure which nobody knows, nobody does, to be frank. I've been telling it for many, many years. This is the one which is in Shield's textbook was picked up. But I just want to give you an idea of how to think outside the box, because you are all postgraduate, your whole life is kept over there, is still left. Do something which is not given in the books. So this young lady came to me, one eye already gone because of uveitic glaucoma, only one eye is left. There is this entire synechia are there. There is a posterior subcapsular cataract. She literally cannot see. Multiple iridotomies have been done, have failed. So what are we to do? And she said, I will not get operated. She can't see. The pressure is rising, and we were in a big quandary. And I really thought and thought and thought. And this is the first time we got this procedure in the world where we actually use minimal YAG laser, and we cut the synechia. So we started cutting the synechia inferiorly, went up on either side, and we use multiple settings because they invariably bleed. The synechia bleed, but minimal power, and we kept doing this. And you can see ultimately what happened. A closed pupil like this became like this, so that despite the iridotomies being closed, the fluid actually leaked in from here and went into the angle. And since it was dilated, the girl could see from the sides, and that is a smile that I can never forget in a patient. So out of the box, don't think that what is given in the book is only to be done. You should do something more. So see how things like this can be dilated like this. Sometimes when the sutures are tight and we have not done a releasable suture, or you've done a releasable suture and you try and remove it and you can't remove it, then you can use a Hoskins lens like this and use an argon with 1 watt power and 50 micron spot size, cut the suture, and then once you cut the suture, you press the bleb and the bleb is immediately formed. So this is another technique. This is another one of the few techniques in which you see there is a huge the bleb has actually migrated from here onto all these areas. And in this case, it is causing dysesthesia, hypotony, macular edema. So what are we to do? So what we can do in this is that we can paint, we can do the sutures, but then you have to take the patient into the OT. So what we can do is we can just paint by gentian violet, give multiple spots over here with the argan, same as we give in gonioplasty, large spots just to char it out and make it flat over here so that the fluid does not escape inferiorly. And you can see after having done this, the entire fluid is gone and everything resolves. So same way you can actually, if there's an overhanging bleb, you can paint it and you see how it flattens out. So these are very different techniques, but basically you should remember about iridotomy, argan laser trabeculoplasty, how to treat a malignant glaucoma with laser, and SLT and DLCP. These are the questions which are likely to be asked, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. It's always a pleasure listening to you, and very practical and simplified presentation. Sir, one question I wanted to ask you, because a lot of time PGs, they ask that you have mentioned that what is the ideal size of iridotomy? So examination, we always say that it should be 200 micron, isn't it, sir?
Yeah, yeah, that is right. It is many a time very difficult to exactly guess how much to do.
Yeah, exactly. So I remember once few PGs have asked us, how you understand 200 micron, like it's anything you practical like to share.
Yeah, so I'll tell you that you take the spot size of the argan, okay? So your 200 micron argan spot size, when it is exactly focused, okay, without any this thing, any lens and all, then you know exactly what exactly is 200 microns. So you can throw that, you can throw 300 microns. So please tell them not to make too large an iridotomy. It becomes like a peripheral iridotomy at any times.
Thank you, sir. So there is another question in post-laser medication.
Yeah.
In SLT and ALT, can we use topical steroids after SLT?
Yeah. So what happened is, because we did multiple theses, and once our SLTs and this thing was completely failing, and then he came back and said, no, sir, don't use any steroids. Only use anti-inflammatories, and sometimes they told us not to use anti-inflammatory also. So frankly speaking, you can use, because I really don't like SLT and ALTs, but ALT we were using the steroids, okay, but for SLT they specifically told us not to use steroids. So you can use non-steroidal anti-inflammatory to some extent.
Okay. So are you doing SLTs?
Currently, no, because frankly speaking, unless the patient is pregnant, or you want like a steroid-induced glaucoma where you just want to hang on for some more time, or maybe a patient of therapeutic crossroads where all full medications are going on and you want to just hold on for some more time, there we can do it. But for primary patients, let me tell you frankly, Manish, every patient who comes to me from UK, US, Canada, and there are hundreds, every single one of them has had an SLT done, and I've yet to see a patient who's controlled. So frankly speaking, I think it's a... What is your opinion, Manish and Gauri?
We had, Gauri madam, are you there?
I'm unmuting now. Yes, sir. Excellent talk, Dr. Harsh. Enjoyed it as usual. I too don't do too much of SLT, sir. And I have always wondered whether it is something to do with our Indian eyes or, something else, because in the West, you always see that being explored as a primary option.
No, Gauri, have you gone out somewhere and visited them, because they talk something and actually something else is happening? Because every Indian eye I've seen here has failed. And most of the few of the Americans that came to me had an SLT, but it did not work. Have you in their eyes some, because what papers write and what they actually happens is something very different.
True. But the patients that I have seen, like you said, from US or UK are Indian patients, Asian Indians who've been treated.
But
so I thought maybe...
Some of your
Because-
friends, have you ever talked to some of your friends? in
No.
America?
That I have not done, sir. That I have not done. Yeah.
Because really, you are right. It is just maybe it's not working in our eyes. Let us leave it at that.
Yeah.
So there is another question for you, that what is anterior and posterior defocusing?
Okay, so anterior defocusing means that whenever we are having a YAG laser, as we said initially, there is a plasma formation. So there is an area uh, anteriorly and posteriorly which will be hitting out. So normally, let us say you are trying to remove pigment from the anterior segment of the lens. Then what you do is you focus on the lens, then defocus a little anteriorly. Or there is a option in the bag laser itself where you can write down that yes, defocus to 125 micron or 250 microns and something like that. So if you are doing a posterior capsulotomy, you do a posterior defocus so that you don't want to hit the lens. But if you are doing an anterior pigment removal from the lens, then you do an anterior defocusing because you don't want to hit the lens. Let the pigment, let the plasma formation actually sweep away the pigment from the anterior lens surface. Then you do the anterior defocusing. As far as the iridotomy, etc., is concerned, there's no need to do either of them.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Praful Sharma, sir, are you there?
Yeah, I am there.
There was a question for you about what is eye syndrome. If you
What
like-
is? Sorry?
eye syndrome? ICE syndrome.
Oh, IC syndrome is iridocorneal endothelial syndrome. It has got different varieties. It gives rise to secondary angle closure glaucoma. Sometimes the iris component is predominant, sometimes the corneal endothelial component is predominant, and in some cases the glaucoma is very tricky to manage actually. Cogan-Rees, all those iris nevus syndrome or Cogan-Rees syndrome, these all similar syndrome, this comes under this eye syndrome.
Thank you, sir. I think we have 2-3 more questions about laser. So, Dr. Harsh Kumar,
Yeah.
sir, one question is, what is Q-switched laser and what is pulse laser? Would you like to answer that?
Okay, the Q, this is initially there was a mode locked laser which really did not work well. So the mode locked laser is off now, and there's now a Q switched laser, which is the standard laser that we are using. The pulse laser, which now some people are using for instead of the DLCP, they are using a pulse laser. And but there are two things now. In the YAG itself, there are pulses. So you can, if you put it on 2 pulse, there are 2 shots which will come together. So that is one part of it. And the other is the pulse laser, which is otherwise being used, which actually I have used very infrequently. And it works something like a diode laser cyclophotocoagulation.
Thank you, sir. Sir, another thing, how to check PI patency?
Yeah, checking the patency is not possible because only when you are doing it, then you can actually know. But suppose you get an old patient and there is a good flow over there, you can see that if you press sometimes, you can see that the chambers are becoming deeper on that sides. And what happens is that if there is a universal deepening, there is no iris Bombay at that, especially at that area where the peripheral iridotomy is there. Because many times in secondary glaucomas, there may be a patent iridotomy, and yet there are other areas which are having synechia and an iris Bombay. So you may have to do multiple iridotomies. So you have to see the deepening depth of the chamber at that particular areas. But Manish, these are wonderful questions. They are very, very tricky questions.
The questions
I'm
we
really
get
impressed by your
are different.
students are very intelligent nowadays. Yeah.
And sir, just last question, what is the difference between transclear cyclophotocoagulation and cyclocryotherapy? So basically cyclocryo and diode laser cyclophotocoagulation, what is the difference you like to highlight something?
Yeah, so the cyclocryo is a poor man's laser, where the probe and this thing, I think in older, I don't even know if people are still having it or not. Because
Yes,
maybe,
they're very much, because a lot of people are using this retinal probe, and with
yes,
that they cyclocryotherapy, because this transscleral cyclophotocoagulation is the machine is still costly, around 30 lakhs. So the
exactly.
probe also is 12 to 15,000. So again, as you mentioned, it's a poor man's
Yeah, so
for
we all used to do
end-stage
it.
glaucoma.
Yes. So in where you don't have a laser, you can definitely do it. The only problem is there is a lot of pain. So maybe you can spread out your treatment, this thing, paradigm. Otherwise, it is pretty much the effect will be same.
This is all what we had. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Dr. Praful Sharma, sir, and thank you, Dr. Gauri Murthy. And I'll hand over the session to Dr. Satyajit.
Thank you. Thank you.
What a wonderful job by Dr. Harsh Kumar. Graduates are going to try it repeatedly on the YouTube. They've watched it again and again within India and abroad, because it was such a informative talk, and it will be so useful for all the consultants also and the postgraduates also for a long period to come. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, Dr. Gauri Murthy, for that amazing presentation. And thank you, Dr. Praful Sharma, for the presentation that you made in the beginning. Thank you so much, sir. And the postgraduates seen here, they were benefited by asking the questions. But once we put them on the YouTube, there are almost every week 300 to 400 hits, and they are seeing it all around multiple times. So,
No, Dr. Sinha, you are teaching them very well, yaar. The type of question they're asking are mind-boggling. I am really very, very impressed.
But we are very grateful to teachers like yourself for having given time. You are so busy. We are very, very grateful to you. And the postgraduates are very blessed कि आपके sir साथ class.
It is our pleasure, bhai. It is. I've learned so much now. Some of the questions I'm going to rethink again.
In short, it doesn't get any better than this. Glaucoma teaching doesn't get better than this. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Dr. Manish, for the amazing moderation that you do every day. This is the 30th class, consecutive class that we have done today. And tomorrow will be the 31st class.
Yes. Congratulations for getting such wonderful speakers. I was really amazed.
I think the PGs are really blessed to have such speakers, because it is not only you can read theory from textbooks also, but getting a practical perspective is very rare.
Right.
As Dr. Aditya Niyok sir was telling me the same thing. You're not only learning glaucoma, you're also getting inspired towards the specialty to pursue glaucoma after your post-graduation. So I think it's really a pleasure to have you all, sir.
And we are very, very grateful to Intas Pharmaceutical, who is doing this every day for 2 hours. And they are going to this and making YouTube videos out of this and putting it. And it's quite an exercise to do the whole thing. And Manish Gupta ji is with us every day for 2 hours to give us technical support. Thank you so much, Manish Gupta ji. And thank you to the entire Intas representative, especially Chandrasekhar ji, who is there with us every day and who has made this whole program a big success. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much.